Alright guys, welcome back to working on the Ma.K Prowler, and I've got it for the most part all put together here. So here he is. Why don't we do just kind of a quick kind of simple review. I'll just give you guys a little bit of an idea of the general look and size of this guy here first before we move on into talking about what else we need to do to this guy. Just to give you an idea, here's a size comparison with a HD 144 scale Gundam. So you can see not very large in terms of its size, but it does have some cool features here. So it does have a little bit of articulation, as we saw on the unboxing. The joints are kind of made of polycap material in some of them, so you do have some bits here that will move up and down. You can rotate the arms a bit. The elbows have a little bit of bends to them. You can bend that just a little bit there, not really a whole lot. The wrist also, you can kind of move that around just a little bit. The armor flaps, of course, can move up and down here on the side. Those will also move a little bit, and the front and the back also, those will also move a little bit there. The legs of the hip, you can also get those set out a little bit to the side. The knees bend in theory, but again, not really all that much. Forward and back movement of those is going to be pretty limited, and the same thing goes for the ankle. You can move the foot around at the ankle a little bit, but not really all too much. Up underneath the feet, of course, you have that nice detailed part there, and then around the back we have a whole lot going on with the backpack, and not everything is on there. So there's a lot of parts for this that are now actually not attached on here yet. So there's other parts here on the back that need to be attached on, parts on the front as well. So it's not all put together at the moment, just giving you guys kind of a general idea for the time being. The hatch on the top does open, and there's a kind of cool opening gimmick there with that. It does have a kind of working hinge that, like, when you open that up, it kind of pulls out. So you could actually pull that completely out if you wanted to, but that just slides down into there. There is a separate piece though that you can use for that. It's just a set open piece that's more nicely detailed. If you want to have this displayed open, it's nicer to use that one instead. But there's the pilot head installed in there. Again, we did have another pilot head that was included. Again, you have option parts there for that. The whole front of this can open up too, of course. So that's, I guess, if you had like the option parts or something you wanted to display open, you could do the work to make that look a little bit nicer than just completely opened up like that. But it's kind of made in a way that there's a polycap in there, which is what holds it closed. So it's kind of made to be easily opened up if you wanted to open up like that. And the same thing here for the side bits are also just attached to a polycap there in the center, so those can easily be popped out, and you can just kind of pop that out a little bit there on the side as well. So the fact that those parts, the front and the sides, can be easily taken off will be helpful later, because I actually made a little bit of a mistake when putting mine together, and I'll talk about that more here in a moment. Let's just recap a whole bunch of stuff included here with this kit, a lot of different option parts and things like that. So again, of course, we have nice big sheet of waterslide decals. That'll be just kind of something we'll come to much later on. I kind of separated them into, like, in this bag, these are all the parts that are meant to go on here that I'll be putting on. So these are the rest of the parts that are here specifically for making the Prowler, but we do have some leftover parts here from some different other versions of this, just the regular SAFS, as well as the Fireball, I believe was the other one that the parts were from. So a different option part here for the tank, where the Prowler has like this double tank for the backpack. This one has just a single one, so you have that kind of option part as well. You have the different optional pilot head there with the helmet for that. The Fireball arm here, so if you didn't want to have two hands, you wanted to have one hand with like the Fireball's arm, you have the parts for that, so you can make that if you want. Actually, I'm sorry, it goes onto here like that. There you go, there's the full arm, so you could just swap out the whole full arm if you wanted to for that. And that has the little hole on the back for that, for plugging on this. This is the hose that will go from the back of the arm onto this back panel that you'll attach onto the back side of the main chassis, which will plug into there from the back of the chassis to the back of the arm here for that. So you have that even in here as well. Optional parts for these main hoses here, which are just a thinner version. So if you wanted these to be thinner instead of these fatter versions here for the Prowler, you have those in here as well. The original shoulder armor plates are a little bit smaller, so if you wanted them to be not so large, you wanted these a little bit smaller ones, you have those in here just as extra leftover parts as well. If you didn't like the really long antenna blade here for the Prowler, you have the other shorter version in here as well. So if you like the shorter version better, you have that, you could use it instead. And a couple of really interesting bits that I want to talk about here. Now the first one is this round piece here, which, as far as I can tell, I couldn't see in the manual, as far as I can tell, it looks like you can put it on here because it fits perfectly onto the front of the forearm there. So if you had 2 of them, it could be something that you could put on the wrist of both arms, but you only have 1. So I'm guessing this is for, as far as I can tell, for the fireball, because like I said, you only have 1. And actually at the moment I forget which run this was on, so it could be that it was not on one of the runners for the fireball, but on one of the runners for a different kit. But anyway, putting it on the one hand and then of course on the other arm, you'll have the completely different arms, so you wouldn't need 2 of them for that kit, if that makes sense. So I don't know, but you only have 1 of these unfortunately, so it's just kind of something that you could do. Maybe have it on one arm and then have it on the other arm looking like maybe it's just like missing that part, like it got lost somewhere along the way. So something that you could just have as just a nice little option part. You have a couple other just little leftover bits that you could use if you wanted to make yours a little bit more customized by just using these different parts instead. Like for example this cable part here, which will go onto the backpipe, but you can't use that again if you're making the Prowler. It's a little bit different. Or this part, which this little, which when I was talking to Lincoln about this, I compared it to looking like just the toe of a boot here, which just attaches onto the nose of that for making a different version of that. But again, if you're making the Prowler, it has a separate camera unit that you'll put on the front of there. But another interesting thing that I noticed that I wanted to point out to you guys here is at the top of these 2 runners, the A and the B runner, along with just like the runner label here, you'll see there's these little rings which I thought looked interesting, and they look like they're there on purpose. So I asked Link, are those things that are like detail parts basically that are meant to be there, you're supposed to just slice off? So yeah, just slice that off with a really sharp blade, and then you can use that as like a detail part. And I guess that's right, sort of, but it's actually meant for certain details. So like Link mentioned here, the periscope which goes on the top of it has this little molded detail in there, but actually the seam line on this part, there's a seam unfortunately which goes right through the center of that, and so you're meant to kind of have this as a replacement for that, to just have this really nice fine detail for that, but it's something you have to slice off and then glue on the front of there to have this nice fine circle for that. And what I mentioned to Ling while we were talking about this, it just seemed like, why not just mold this part differently to have this detail already on there when uninterrupted by the seam line? And so yeah, I'm not really too sure about that. But anyway, you have a set of 8 of these extra little circles that if you slice off, you can have those just extra little detail parts to add wherever, or for certain particular details like this, or the barrel here of the gun as well, for if you wanted to use like the fireball arm. I guess it's an extra little thing you could use for a little bit of there, or on this little bit, which I think is like the meant to be little camera bit there on the arm for that, like there. So anyway, some interesting options that you have there just between all of the extra leftover parts and everything, but I'm not sure really if I'm going to use any of those. I may just stick to just the original design here, but let's talk about how I messed up on this kit. So one reason why I haven't put some of the stuff on the backpack is that I just can't, because you have to drill, and you have to drill on the front of the kit here as well. Now, I missed this in the manual for the first part of the construction, so let me just show you guys. So hopefully you won't make the same mistake that I did. You have to pay attention here, these little bubbles coming off just the very first step of the construction, putting the first few parts together. These little bits, that's telling you that you need to drill out holes in these parts. Now there is a kind of pre-marked hole there on the inner side of the part. I'll try to show you on the front part of the chassis here. This is just the front. And then on the back you'll see there's 2 little indents. Now those are drill points, so it's already got that kind of marked out in the mold for you where you need to drill for adding the parts onto this kit. So that's actually the next step down here. You can see for this front part it says to take your 2mm, that's what that 2.0, and I think that's a theta symbol, I believe. But anyway, it's just a 2.0, just take a 2mm drill bit, and that's what you need to use for these. So you just drill that out with 2mm holes. So with the front, that's easy enough, but with the back part, stupidly, because I wasn't following the instructions, I missed that part of the instructions. I already glued the seam line for the 2 halves of the back here. I already glued that seam line, so it's going to be a little bit harder to get to those parts that I need to drill out from the back of that, but I think I should still be able to get to them at least enough, or at least with a needle or a knife or something like that, just to poke the holes a little bit where I need to drill, and then I can just drill from the outside going in, kind of the opposite way. So a little bit of troubleshooting just because of the fact that I didn't follow the instructions very carefully. So let me take this apart a little bit, and then we'll try to get to drilling those holes out that I need to drill out for adding the extra parts here on the back. And basically just what I'm going to do is just use this tool here to just poke out the holes from the inside, I think. Just poke enough little tiny hole there for you to be able to tell where that is, and then just drill it from the other side. But what Link suggested to me is another trick that you can do is actually take the part and hold it up to the light, and the plastic is thin enough, and luckily it's white as well, so it's very easy to see through that with light on the other side. So just hold it up to the light, and then you can see where the hole is, and you can just mark it with a pen or something, or just mark it with your knife or with a pointed whatever to just drill it out. So if you can't reach it from the inside, if you're like me, if you make a mistake, you glue something close, you need to drill a hole in it. If you can't reach it from the inside, just to hold it up to the light and you can poke it from the outside. So there's different options. It's not the end of the world if you do that. So let's get these holes drilled out so we can get the backpack parts put on it. Alright, well that worked out well enough. I actually didn't need to use this at all. I wasn't sure if these drills were going to be long enough because the tip on this, not all that long. I wasn't sure if it was going to be long enough to reach, but it was, so I actually didn't need to use that, so that's good. And now you can see then these parts will fit onto the back where they're supposed to be, and it fits very snugly, nicely onto the back of there. So if you wanted to add like a little bit of putty around the edge there to give it that look like it's been sort of like welded onto there or something like that. This other bit goes on here on the other side. Let's see. I think what you also could do if you didn't really want to bother drilling out the holes is all just cut off the pegs and just glue the part directly onto the chassis without worrying about the pegs at all, because you really don't need them. You just have to get it to where it would fit on there just right. That bit goes onto there, and you have this other bit that you're meant to glue on, that I'll have to glue onto here later, but for the time being it kind of stays in there well enough. You guys can get the idea. So you'll have those extra bits there onto the back, and then on the front is his nose camera. Got those holes drilled out, so this should fit onto the front here now as well. Just fits onto there, and you have the clear part on the front. Now the clear part, yeah, how do you go about that? Because this whole front part is clear, only the couple little bits are supposed to be clear, the kind of squares in the center of that. So you could just mask the square parts that are meant to be clear, so you had to paint the rest of the outside of that. There's a few different ways that you could do it, I guess, really. Honestly, I'm not really too concerned about keeping those clear because I'm not installing an LED or anything behind there, so there's really not any reason particularly to keep them clear, I guess. But I'll see. For the moment, anyway, I'm not decided if I really want to bother masking that or just paint the whole thing. There is a seam line right through the middle of this part, so that's kind of the next big step. After that little fiasco is fixed, pretty much everything, you know, is just glue in place and paint for the most part. There's just a little bit more sanding to be done and just a lot of seam line sanding. So I've got all the seam lines on the kit already glued. The seam line on this part on the front, the seam line on parts for the legs, so the upper leg, the lower leg, the foot all have seams on there. On the arms here as well, seam line on the upper arm, seam line on the lower arm. And then the tanks, basically any cylindrical part has a seam line on it, so here on the tanks as well. So everything glued together pretty nicely though, so I don't think there's really going to be too much fixing basically to have to do with putty or anything like that. Just a bunch of sanding just to get rid of the extra glue from that. Might have to do a little bit of touch up just with little super glue or something like that, just to touch up, fill in just tiny little bits of seam line that weren't perfectly closed up. But for the most part everything went together pretty smoothly, so from here it's just basically doing all of that. I'll get everything all sanded up and we'll get him basically as prepped as we can for painting. I'll get him all cleaned up, and then in the next episode I think we'll talk about some of the painting process that we're going to do for this guy. And if I decide I want to use any of these option parts instead to make mine a little bit more customized, I'm not totally decided on that, but while I'm going through the process of getting rid of all the seams and getting some other bits kind of glued together and everything, I might decide maybe I want to use one or two of the, we'll call them optional parts instead. If I do, I'll let you guys know about that in the next episode. But that's it for this episode, guys. Cool kit for sure, and I'm enjoying it. So I'll see you guys in the next episode pretty soon. Have a good one, guys, and if you have any other questions, of course, feel free to leave those down below. And again, of course, I have to say a big thank you to Lincoln for helping me out with little questions along the way. So if you guys have not checked out his channel, do check out Paint on Plastic by Lincoln Wright. He's a wealth of information, especially regarding all things machining Krieger. So check him out if you haven't. Thank you, Link, for your help, and thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Thanks for watching. See you next time.